Greetings, lovers of lore and legend, whether student, teacher, parent, storyteller, or temporal refugee from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
The Great Tales is a podcast about myths and legends from both inside and outside the Christian tradition. Twice a month, we bring you the stories that Christians have read, told, and wrestled with for centuries.
And today we are talking with our good friend, Father Gintaras Sungaila, who is joining us live from Vilnius in Lithuania. So Father Gintaras is a priest of the Ecumenical Patriarchate serving there in Vilnius. We met Father Gintaras for the first time in 2022 when we took a pilgrimage to Lithuania together, and he guided us throughout the country. And that journey became the podcast, documentary, and book, The Wolf and the Cross. And of course, you can get that book from store.ancientfaith.com.
Today, we'll be talking about one of the most famous Lithuanian fairy tales. I actually can't believe we haven't already covered it.
No, we haven't. We were saving it.
Weird. Yeah, so this will be a story about Eglė, Queen of Serpents, one of the many stories that relate to the Baltic Sea that forms most of Lithuania's western border. We're also hoping to hear a little bit from Father Gintaras about some of the strange stories that come out of the late medieval period when pagan stories begin to mix and match with the lives of Christian saints.
So, welcome, Father Gintaras, to the Great Tales.
Thank you very much for having me. It is a real joy to join you this evening from Vilnius. Although for you, as I understand, it is still midday or a little bit after the midday.
Yep.
But in mythical tales, I think it is always the same time, eternity. I am very happy to see you again, even if only online. And I am glad to dive with you into the world of Lithuanian tales.
Yes, although it reminds me we need to schedule a visit again to Lithuania so that it's not just online, so it can be in person once again. So we have to make that happen. A word from our sponsor, Deacon Seraph.
Oh, that's right.
If
yeah,
you
that's
please.
Me. That's me. That's over to me.
I wrote that line for you, man.
That's right. What is the deal with the legendary mythic stories of the Orthodox Christian tradition? I don't know why you put a note in here for me to do this.
I didn't.
Seinfeld.
I didn't.
It's in the script, guys. You can't see it, but it's there. Join us at St. Ignatius Antiochian Orthodox Church in Franklin. No, okay, all right.
Don't do that.
Franklin, Tennessee. You started with what is the deal? What am I supposed to do with that? Join us at St. Ignatius Antiochian Orthodox Church in Franklin, Tennessee on the south side of Nashville for sessions with the two of us spanning the saint's defeat of dragons to an unlikely saint called the Fox. We're doing an event called the Orthodox Legendarium on July 31st through August the 2nd. And you can find more info at ancientfaith.com/events. So if you've ever wanted this podcast to be an in-person event, this is us doing that. So if you want us to do that more, you have to come to prove there is interest.
That's right. Tickets are going. So get your tickets now, people.
Yep.
And you can meet us in person. And you can see that Deacon Seraphim really is that tall.
I really am that tall.
He really is that tall.
Yep. All right. So we talked about Baltic fairy tales on a previous episode, discussing the stories of Sovius the Iron Wolf and the Swan Queen. This is back in episode 14, Tales from the Amber Sea. Episode 14, this is episode 38. So that was 1,000,000 years ago, I think that's what that means.
It feels like it.
And so today we have a real Lithuanian and also expert on Lithuanian history and culture. So what we'd ask you, Father Gintaras, is, Father, please tell us about how fairy tales fit into Lithuanian culture.
Thank you for this kind introduction, but I should say that I am certainly not an expert in Lithuanian mythology, although I have studied religious studies, but my main focus was not Lithuanian folklore. But as a Lithuanian, I'm very happy to share my experience. And yes, fairy tales have a very important place in our Lithuanian culture. Today, fairy tales are often associated with children, but I would not describe them simply as children's entertainment. Of course, many Lithuanians first encounter them as children from parents, grandparents, school books, theater, or illustrated books. But traditionally, fairy tales were part of a living oral culture.
Okay.
They were told by real storytellers. Of course, it could be grandparents, older relatives, but it could also be shepherd children and sometimes even beggars or traveling people who would stop at someone's house and would bring stories from elsewhere. And I think that the setting of the storytelling is also very important. Very often the stories were told in the evening, especially during long evenings in the autumn or winter nights. So one should imagine not only the text of the tale, not only what's happening in the tale, but also the whole atmosphere. A family gathered inside a wooden house, a cold or rainy, dark evening outside. You know, in autumn we often have a lot of rain, and in winter we have a lot of snow. So family gathers together. Children and adults are listening to the voice of the storyteller, and the world beyond the walls is becoming more and more mysterious.
And the winter in Lithuania, I mean, it's so if, a lot of people don't know where Lithuania is exactly, unless you're there as you are. But just to give some people a sense, like Lithuania is as far north as Newfoundland in Canada, right? As far north, I think farther north than Scotland in the UK. So I mean, it's up there. So the winters are cold and longer than they are, like where I live, where Deacon Serpents lives, for sure.
Yes, Scotland is a warmer place than Lithuania. Here also, you not only have division north and south. Usually people think the more north you go, it's colder, but also east and west. The more west you go, it's warmer, and more east you go, it gets colder. So it's also important.
It's because of the sea, right? And also the elevation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Lithuanian fairy tales were not always soft or sentimental. They could be frightening, violent, tragic, and very intense. But that was part of their function. They taught children about danger, loyalty, betrayal, courage, fear, and the moral structure of the world. In traditional culture, fear itself could be educational, not in the sense of traumatizing children, but in the sense of helping them encounter fear in safe place through the story.
That's really interesting because, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, that's interesting because at least in modern American culture, there's often this idea that frightening children is simply bad, that is not a thing that, kids should be safe from that. And here you're saying that the part of the point of these stories is to introduce fear to them.
Yes, and sometimes we get very grotesque. Sometimes you have to listen to the story before reading it to your kid. When our son was still very little, we started reading him one traditional Lithuanian fairy tale. And at one point, the character started killing a lot of people, and there was interaction with the dead. And when we just looked with my wife at each other, and I understood that I need to censor it and create some other version because our son is too little to hear it. But
right.
Yeah, but it was part of it. I listened to your shows before this, and I heard that you were referring to Brother Grimm, yes. And you can see similar things there, that it's not always fairy tale as we understand it today. So traditional Lithuanian fairy tales are often quite far from the modern animated fairy tale world, where everything is softened and it usually ends happily.
Yeah,
they can be darker, older, and more serious, and this is part of their power.
Yeah, I think that's part of what we're trying to do on this show is to help people encounter stories that come from before this kind of artificial sanitizing that like in Disney especially. Disney especially is really bad about this. So okay, so I mean, the way that most people might think of fairy tales, if they're historically minded at all, is that fairy tales are connected in some way to paganism, right? And yet they're stories that sort of last, even when a population has been Christianized. And for those who may not remember, don't know this, Lithuania was the last nation in Europe to be Christianized. Not until the late 14th century did the general baptism of Lithuania begin under the Roman Catholic Church. And so, I mean, prior to that time, and even for a little while after that, most people are pagan. And so that's much more recent than most European countries. So, like, what is the relationship between fairy tales and historical paganism in Lithuania? Are they kind of closer because of this more recent, like late medieval conversion?
Yes. So stereotypically, people say that in Latvia, another Baltic nation, one of the two surviving Baltic nations, in Latvia, paganism survives in folk songs. In Lithuania, usually it's said that paganism survives in its fairy tales. But I think that relationship is very complex, and I think we have to be very careful here. Fairy tales were written down very late, mostly in early Christian society, and sometimes they were shaped by literary taste, romantic nationalism, or the interests of the collectors. But at the same time, they often preserve very old motifs. We see sacred or dangerous animals, journeys into the other worlds, marriage to a supernatural being, magical speech, taboos, transformations into animals, into trees, and a very strong sense that nature is alive and meaningful, which is kind of pagan. Sometimes modern neo-pagans move too quickly and say that these fairy tales are simply surviving pagan myths, but I think that's too simplistic. I would say that Lithuanian fairy tales often contain echoes of pre-Christian worldview, pre-Christian civilization. Later, these echoes continued to live inside the Christian culture and often were Christianized. And that is where things become especially interesting. The old mythic structures may remain, but the names, moral language, and religious imagination become Christian. So Lithuanian fairy tales are not pagan scriptures, but they are not merely entertainment as well. They are a kind of memory chamber where we hear several voices at once: the village, the family, the forest, the sea, the old Baltic imagination, and later the Christian imagination as well. And here it is important to remember that much of traditional Lithuanian culture was preserved in the countryside, in a village life, rather than in the multi-ethnic cities of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. As listeners may know from The Wolf and the Cross, the cities of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania were often multi-ethnic and connected with Ruthenian, Polish, Jewish, German, and other cultural worlds. But the fairy tale tradition we are speaking about is especially rooted in the Lithuanian-speaking countryside where it survived.
And I know that, I mean, there was a point, like in the late 19th century particularly, that Lithuanian was almost gone from the cities, and that the language itself existed almost entirely in the countryside, and almost disappeared. So this is almost a gift from I think from that time and place to the present. Yeah,
we had a period where, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Father.
Yeah, I wanted to add that we had a period of Polonization when most of nobility switched to Polish. And the Catholic Church also influenced that because it was the Polish crown, and everything in the Catholic Church was done in Polish. And later in the Russian Empire, in the Soviet Union, we had a period of Russification. And now we have a period of Americanization.
We don't come with guns, just podcasts and
Hollywood.
Hollywood, yeah, which might be more violent. I don't know.
I'm very sorry to say we do sometimes come with guns, but anyway, that's
Yes,
not
but
the
not to
focus,
Lithuania.
Not
Not
the
to
focus
Lithuania.
of this podcast.
Only to defend us.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. So the I'll just say one of the interesting things is that the 19th century, early 19th century, is when a lot of late 18th, early 19th century is the time when most of the stuff is kind of being collected and categorized, which of course corresponds with the rise of nationalism and the idea of national languages, national poets, national stories all across Europe. Obviously, that has some bad manifestations, famously so, but also obviously some very, very important ones, for the history of Lithuania and other countries in Europe. So right around this time is when a lot of the stuff is being collected. And of course, all of the really good collections of Lithuanian fairy tales that I could find back in the day were all compiled by Germans who went around kind of collecting all of these things as part of their larger Indo-European project. I don't know if you have anything you want to mention about that, Father Gintaras.
Yeah, actually, Immanuel Kant, a well-known German philosopher, knew some Lithuanian, wrote about Lithuanians,
Yes.
because in Königsberg, in this region, there was a large Lithuanian Lutheran diaspora. So Lithuanians interacted with Germans a lot in Königsberg, and the cultures were interconnected. So that's why a lot of things were saved by German scholarship. And also, even today in Germany, there are Lithuanian schools and Lithuanian departments and universities. And you can be surprised when you visit a German university and you meet Germans who speak Lithuanian, because we have a tradition of Lithuanian scholarship.
I was also quite surprised as we were out on the Cronian Spit to find Thomas Mann's house, which was very exciting to me, as I'm a huge fan of his, and also, Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of kind of interesting cross-pollinization there, which would be surprising if you don't know anything about the history of the country, but if you've watched The Wolf and the Cross or read The Wolf and the Cross, then you'll get a good sense of it. So, all right. So our main discussion today is going to be about Eglė, Queen of Serpents. So, Father Gintaras, could you kind of describe for us the place of this particular story in Lithuanian culture? Did you grow up hearing this story?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Eglė Žalčių Karalienė, as it is called in Lithuanian, is probably one of the most famous Lithuanian fairy tales, perhaps the most famous one. I did hear it growing up. We also learned about it at school, and I think many Lithuanians would say the same. Even if someone does not remember every detail, the whole narrative, they usually know the basic images. Eglė, Žilvinas, who is a serpent husband, the sea, the children who become trees, and the tragic death of Žilvinas. You can even see how important this is from monuments and artworks connected with this story. The most famous sculpture of Eglė, Queen of Serpents, stands in Palanga. You went there, you saw it, in the old botanical park near the Baltic Sea. And when I was preparing for this show, I actually found out that there is even a monument to Eglė in Canberra. Is it pronounced Canberra, the capital of Australia? It was erected by
Canberra. Actually, I think it was Canberra. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm embarrassed. I don't know off the top of my head. I think it is Canberra. I think that's correct.
We say in Lithuanian Canberra. So yeah, it was erected by it was erected by Lithuanian community there. So in Australia, there is a monument. If any Australians are listening to this, go and check it out.
According to the internet, by the way, it's Canberra.
Almost like with two syllables. Canberra.
Yeah. Or if you think of like Banbra, it's the same kind of thing.
Banbra. Yeah, sure.
Banbra, Edinburgh. Yeah.
So the story is remembered not only in Lithuania but also by our Lithuanian diaspora across the world. And in the Lithuanian culture, Eglė, Queen of Serpents, has almost the status of national myth. What Father Seraphim spoke about the 19th century romantic nationalism, and during this era, it was elevated as a kind of national myth. The famous Lithuanian scholar, famous for Lithuania because he brought Religionswissenschaft to Lithuania, Gintaras Beresnevičius. He interpreted this myth as a kind of Lithuanian theogony, and he read the transformation of Eglė and her children into trees as explanation of how sacred beings receive their places of manifestation in nature, especially in trees, since in pre-Christian Lithuania, trees were sacred, forests were sacred, and trees were the place where spirits and gods live.
Yeah.
So this is a world in which trees, groves, forests are not merely scenery, they are places where sacred powers live. That is why story feels so mythic. Family tragedy becomes the landscape.
You know, one of the things I was going to say, one of the things that strikes me about the place of this story within Lithuanian culture is, and I think this might strike Americans as kind of odd, is that the names of the main characters, so Eglė, Žilvinas, right, and even the names of the children, like Wosis and so forth, you will meet people in Lithuania with all of these names.
Yes. Yes.
And for us, for us, that would be like if you met somebody named Cinderella, like immediately, you know, like we're like, oh, like in the story, you know, but yeah, which I don't think we don't really have anything like that, do we?
Well, it's tricky because in most of our, I say our, right? Cinderella is obviously, it's a German story. So
sure.
Elizabeth,
but maybe
right?
One of the most famous fairy tales, at least in American culture.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that, you know, Cinderella is just Elizabeth. You know, most characters in German and English fairy tales tend to be named Jack, Mary, Elizabeth.
Sure.
John, like some variation of those, Hans, right? You know, so it's you know, they have these sort of like this is almost like more the equivalent of naming somebody, I don't know, like Eurydice. Like it's weirder than that because this is not just a fairy tale. This goes back far enough, as Father Gintaras just pointed out. This goes back far enough. It's more into sort of like mythological things. So it's I don't know, like. In a certain way, I feel like the stories of Grimm's, maybe not every Grimm story, but many of the stories of Grimm's are a little more, you can imagine them happening in a kind of more contemporary space, where this is a story that's almost a more of a myth than a fairy tale. It's something that happens in mythic time. So yeah, it would be like, obviously you do sometimes run into people with fun names from Greek mythology, but it's only because their parents are weird, you know. Like you know.
Well, didn't you name one of your children? Did you, or is it just your brother who's named Arthur? That might be a rough equivalent for us, Arthur, and someone like King Arthur.
Yeah. My brother's named Arthur. No, there's something about Arthur's probably a good example. That's a good equivalency, I think. Certainly, like if you ever meet somebody named Iphigenia, they were probably picked on a lot in school. So.
But here it's totally normal to be, if you are a girl, Eglė, if you are a boy, Ąžuolas or Osis, it's totally normal. And actually, Arthur is also a pretty common name here, Arturas.
Arturas, right, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the things I would like to point out, which you spoke about, if we compare it to Greek mythology, when you read Greek mythology, you have to keep in mind that, for example, Nyx is both night and the name of the goddess. And, for example, Helios is also sun and name of God, yes? So we have a similar wordplay here. Eglė is it pronounced spruce? The tree.
Spruce.
Spruce. So Eglė is spruce, and it's also a female name. So it's common female name, and it's spruce. Ąžuolas is oak, and it's a common male name. So when you read the translation, of course it says Eglė, 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 but you could put spruce with a capital S, and nothing would change. You know?
I've seen a couple of translations of it like that, which I don't know, struck me as kind of odd. But obviously that's just because I'm reading it in English. Actually, here's a fun little bit. I know that we have a number of homeschoolers who listen to this show, who watch this show. And a lot of you may have gotten, if you're an Orthodox homeschooler or just, an Orthodox parent, you may have gotten little booklets, or there's sometimes big booklets and stuff, from an Orthodox publisher called, in Greek, I would pronounce it Potamitis, but you might see it as Potamitis Publishing. The author is Dionysios Potamitis, who's obviously Greek. But the illustrator, her name is Eglė Ekaterina. And if you meet someone named Eglė, they are definitely Lithuanian. So yes, that name is in many of your homes already. If you take a look at those little booklets that you might have with the little saints' lives or this kind of thing, very, very popular. You can see them in a lot of parish bookstores here. I've actually met Dionysius. I have not met his wife Eglė. But I hope I will meet her someday. But a little sort of Easter egg, as we like to say in American Orthodoxy, from Lithuania.
Yes. So one more thing I wanted to share before reading the story is that even though we will be listening to the story in prose, Lithuanians also know it in a poetic version written in the 20th century by Salomėja Nėris, who was one of the best-known Lithuanian poets of the first half of the 20th century. Her version is read at schools, and it has theater and radio reenactments, so it's pretty popular. So just to give you a little bit of taste of it, here is how Salomėja Nėris opens the poem in Lithuanian. Lenktyniuoja raitos, bangos ties krantu, trys žvejų mergaitės sukasi ratu. Jas rausvai nudažo saulė leisdamos, krikščia jos ir gražos lygi sutemos.
That rhymes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Deacon Seraphim, in your incredible amount of free time, maybe you should consider writing a rhymed version of this for English speaking people. I'm just throwing that out there because I know in all of your bios, the first thing it says about you is that you're a poet. So get cracking, buddy.
I am a poet. That is true.
That's right. All right. Well, all that said, let's get to the actual story. So the story, at least in this prose version, is kind of divided into 3 parts. And so we're going to read each of those parts continuously and then stop at the end of each part and then talk about that kind of as we go. So the version that we're about to read is the one that, if you have our book, The Wolf and the Cross, so this is the version that's in the book. Actually, I should say this is the pre-edited version before we handed it off to the editor. So it might be slightly different than the book, but I think it's mostly going to be the same. And I should just also say, Father Gintaras wrote the foreword to this book. And isn't it, it's going to be translated into Lithuanian, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
That's great. I'm so honored. It makes me so happy.
Yeah, and this version of the story has its origin in one of the versions I mentioned earlier that was written down by a German, folklorist, philologist. I forget which one now. I'd have to go back and look at my notes. But there are, I believe, 130 different versions recorded of this story in Lithuania, and then about some 60 also recorded in Latvia. And so, they're all basically the same story. They just have little variations. But one of the interesting things about them is that the formulaic phrases that we'll get to especially the ones where like the incantation to like open the door to the undersea kingdom and things like this, that all those incantations are basically exactly the same in all 200 plus extant versions of this. So that's an indication, of antiquity. It's an indication of how important this story was, not just in what is now Lithuania, but kind of in the Baltic region. So.
Do you meet, are there people in Latvia also with these names as well? Are Latvian rich in these names, Father?
I'm not sure. I don't know so much about Latvia, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I would add that some scholars say that the incantations may point to the fact that there might be a ritual which existed, which was connected to this mythic story. But because we don't have much about true Lithuanian paganism, which was a religion with priesthood, with occult theology, not open to everyone, etc., etc. It's just like a hypothesis, not based in the facts. But there is a hypothesis that this myth can be linked to some ritual which doesn't exist and didn't exist when it was written down.
Got it. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is Deacon Seraphim, you and I are going to take turns reading this because this is an English translation, and so we're going to read it, and then we'll pause and we'll have a conversation together about each part. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start the first part. Long ago, in another time, there lived an old man and his wife. They had 12 sons and 3 daughters. Their youngest daughter was named Eglė, and she was the most beautiful girl in the whole countryside. One day, Eglė and her 2 older sisters decided to go swimming. They laughed and bathed and splashed about in the river, and when they were done, they climbed up onto the riverbank to dress and to comb their hair. But when Eglė was about to put on her clothes, she saw something wriggling in her blouse. To her disgust, she found that a sea serpent had slithered up one of her sleeves. Her older sisters threw the blouse down and jumped on it, doing anything they could to dislodge the serpent. But the serpent would not leave. Finally, the serpent turned to young Eglė and spoke to her with the voice of a man. Eglė, Eglė, promise to marry me and become my bride, and I will gladly come out of this blouse. Eglė began to cry. How could she agree to marry a serpent? Please, O serpent, she wept, go back to where you came from, to the deep sea, and leave me in peace. But the serpent would not listen, only calling to her again, Eglė, Eglė, promise to marry me and become my bride, and I will gladly come out of this blouse. Finding there was nothing else she could do, Eglė agreed, promising the serpent that she would become his bride. Her sisters, however, thought little of this, for how could a serpent ever take a human girl as his bride? When they went back and told her parents, they too thought little of this, for how could a snake press his claim? By the next day, everyone had forgotten about the incident. Everyone except for Eglė. On the 3rd day after the engagement, the family found that all of the serpents in the land had gathered and overrun their farm, bringing a wagon with them. I'm just imagining in my head, like, how did a bunch of serpents drag a wagon? But anyway, the whole family was terrified as the serpents slithered in heaving masses across every inch of the barn, the farm, and the house. And one of the serpents entered the house itself, addressing himself to the old man to discuss the terms of the marital union. At first, the old man hemmed and hawed, refusing to believe that this was really happening and hoping it was all a dream. But when every serpent in the land is overrunning your farm, the reality of things soon sets in, and it does not matter how one feels. So it was that the old man agreed to give his youngest and most beautiful daughter over to the serpents. But he had treachery in his heart. I will give you my youngest daughter, my sweet and beautiful Eglė, only you must give me a little time so that she can be properly adorned as a bride, and so that the wedding gifts can be prepared. The serpent agreed to this, but as soon as the old man could get away, he went to a wise woman who lived on the edge of the forest and asked her what he should do. It's easy to fool the serpents, the wise woman said. Load up the wedding gifts in the wagon, but instead of your daughter, dress up your goose in her clothes and give him the goose as a bride. The old man went home and did as the wise woman had advised. He took his fat white goose and dressed it up in Agla's clothes. When the serpents came with their wagon, he placed the goose and the wedding gifts in it and climbed into the wagon with his daughter to begin the journey to his new son-in-law's home. But as they were beginning their journey, they heard a cuckoo bird singing in a tree nearby. Cuckoo, cuckoo, you've been fooled. Instead of a bride, he's given you a goose. Cuckoo, cuckoo. The serpents returned to the farm, threw the goose, the old man, and the wedding gifts out of the wagon and demanded the real bride. The old man begged for more time. Please, he said, I will give you my daughter, but you must give us another day to finish her bridal gown. Serpents agreed to this, but as soon as he could get away, the old man went to the wise woman who lived on the edge of the forest and asked her what he should do. It's easy enough to fool the serpents, the wise woman said. Load up the wedding gifts in the wagon, but instead of your daughter, array a white sheep in the new dress and give her as a bride. The old man went home and did as the wise woman advised. He took a white woolly sheep and dressed it up in Agla's new wedding finery. When the serpents came with their wagon, he placed the sheep and the wedding gifts in it and climbed into the wagon with his daughter to begin the journey back to his new son-in-law's house. But as they were beginning their journey, they heard the cuckoo bird singing in a nearby tree. Cuckoo, cuckoo, you've been fooled. Instead of a bride, he has given you a white sheep. Cuckoo, cuckoo. The serpents returned to the farm, threw the white sheep, the old man, and the wedding gifts out of the wagon and demanded the real bride. The old man begged for more time. Please, he said, I will give you my daughter, but you must give us another day to finish arraying her in her bridal finery. Serpents agreed to this, but as soon as he could get away, the old man went to the wise woman who lived on the edge of the forest and asked her what he should do. It's easy enough to fool the serpents, the wise woman said. Load up the wedding gifts in the wagon, but instead of your daughter, array a white cow in the new dress and wedding finery and give her as a bride. The old man went home and did as the wise woman had advised. He took the family's white cow and dressed it up in Agla's new wedding finery. When the serpents came with their wagon, he placed the cow and the wedding gifts in it and climbed into the wagon with his daughter to begin the journey back to his new son-in-law's home. But as they were beginning their journey, they heard the cuckoo bird singing in a nearby tree. Cuckoo, cuckoo, you've been fooled. Instead of a bride, he has given you a white cow. Cuckoo, cuckoo. The serpents returned, and they were in a white, hot rage. They threw the white cow, and I'm just imagining in my head a bunch of serpents throwing a cow. Okay. They threw the white cow, the old man, and the wedding gifts out of the wagon and demanded.
A sport in Scotland.
That's right. It does sound like a Scottish sport. I was actually just listening to a podcast where they're talking about Charles the 12th of Sweden, who apparently, not Charles the 12th, Augustus the Strong, who was like he was King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania for a little while, but also was like the Elector of Saxony. And he used to like to throw foxes up in the air. Like this was his thing he did for fun. He would do it like to impress.
We've all been there. Just like you have a fox and you're like, man, I just want to toss this thing.
Toss the fox.
Toss the fox.
Tossing. Okay, anyway, they threw and they demanded that they be given Eglė at once. Otherwise, they threatened that the next year there would be no more rain. No rain, followed by a year of flood, and then a year of famine. Seeing that there was nothing else they could do, they arrayed Eglė in all of her wedding finery. They put on her new dress and prepared her to meet her new husband. And Eglė wept within the house. When all had been made ready, they put Eglė and the wedding gifts into the wagon, and the serpents took her away. As they drove, they heard the cuckoo singing from a nearby tree. Cuckoo, cuckoo, drive, drive. The groom awaits his bride. Cuckoo. Eventually, Eglė and her wagon, full of writhing chaperones, came to the edge of the sea, and there, instead of the sea serpent, she met a handsome young prince. I am the snake who crawled into the sleeve of your blouse, he said. My name is Gilvanus, and I have come to take you to my palace beneath the sea. Then he took her by the hand and took her to a certain island from which they descended to his realm beneath the sea. Gilvinus showed Eglė his palace, which was made of amber, because what else would you find at the bottom of the Baltic Sea? Made of amber, and there the wedding was held. For 3 weeks they drank, danced, and feasted, and there were many beautiful guests in the Serpent's palace, and Eglė became happy and forgot her sorrows, her family, and her homeland. And that's the end of the first part. One thing I wanted to note is, like, in this telling of the tale, the English words serpent and snake are used interchangeably. But I remember when you and I, Father, were walking along the top of a hill fort there in Lithuania, we came across a serpent, and I called it a snake, and you said, "No, that's not a snake. That's a serpent." And so. And I was confused, because to me they're two different words in English, two different words for the same thing. But what is the difference between serpents and what are the Lithuanian words that are for these two animals?
So yes, I remember that moment. It was a very symbolic moment, since we were at the top of Voruta Hill, which might be the first Lithuanian capital, and as I want to share with you, snake or serpent is a very important, even theophanic animal for Lithuanians. And as we were at that pagan place, a serpent appeared, and it was very, very symbolic. So yes, before that, growing up in Lithuanian culture, I was used to have two separate words for these animals. One is gyvatė. Gyvatė can be venomous. Some of them are not, but usually gyvatė is venomous. And another word is žaltys. And you hear žaltys, žilvinas, used žaltys, serpent, turns into žilvinas, the same ž, yes. So žaltys, this kind of serpent or snake, it's always non-venomous. And I thought that since we have two words, venomous and non-venomous, gyvatė and žaltys, I thought that other languages have to have this too. And I jumped to conclusion that snakes are venomous and serpents are not. And for me, it was the moment when I realized, oh no, other cultures don't have this. And I started thinking about other languages, Russian and others, which I know, and I realized, it's a little bit different here. And yes, so žaltys is not venomous, and in Lithuania, it's in the countryside, it's an animal with which even today many people interact with. Even today, it's normal in Lithuanian countryside to leave milk for these kinds of serpents, and they come, they drink it. Often, if it's an old house where many generations lived, we have a nest under the house. And it also has utilitarian purpose, since they eat mice and catch other parasitic animals. But it also had, in the pre-Christian Lithuania, it had also religious significance. And archaeologists say that they find figures of these serpents even from the Stone Age. And throughout the Iron Age, etc., people had figures of žaltys. And it was considered to be very dangerous to do some harm to žaltys. So the fact that they are messing with žilvinas here, with žaltys, with the serpent, it's very dangerous. And he later says that if you do it like this, there will be flood, there will be no rain, a famine, etc., etc. Žaltys is associated with justice, and in Christian culture, even with vengefulness, even with bad kind of justice, when it becomes vengeance. So it's an animal with which Lithuanians interact, and if you think about it, like Saint Augustine, when he interprets the Bible, he says it's important to understand the symbol itself, not before we move to the allegory, just understand the material symbol. So if we try to understand the material side of it, this kind of serpent lives near water. So it's connected with water. It goes underground, so it's connected to earth and underground. And also when it's raining, these serpents go out. So they also are connected with rain, water. Here also here that they control the rain, and they are chthonic. They are connected with underground and with water. So if you think about Lithuanian pagan gods, you might guess which god they were connected with. Would you like to guess?
I mean, Perkunas is connected with a number of those kinds of things, the rain and all that stuff. But
But
I don't know.
he's
Is it?
atmospheric.
Yeah, but yeah. So would it be
Perkunas,
Nereus, the god of the sea? Is that? No, I'm guessing wrong.
actually, they are connected with Valnes or Velenus.
Oh, the sort of the devil,
Yes, the god of the underworld.
the underworld
Since
god.
they
Okay.
go below the earth, and in some versions of this tale, it's actually said that it was Valnes who proposed to Eglė, and he became
wow.
Žilvinas. So it starts immediately with Valnes, who becomes Žilvinas.
That's a much
And,
darker story. Then it becomes like sort of marrying the devil.
Well,
Yeah,
or,
but,
or like
again-
marrying Pluto, you know.
Yeah, Hades.
We have to make distinctions since it's pre-Christian story.
Okay.
Because there are three highest gods in Lithuanian pagan pantheon. It's the first is Dievas, which is like Sanskrit Deva. You talked about it in the last podcast about and in Attic pronunciation, Zeus in Attic Greek, yes, Dievas in Latvian Dievs. So it was the father figure, god of heaven, and it was what we call in the religious studies Deus Atiosus, God which doesn't participate in the world anymore. He created everything. He is father of everything, but he doesn't participate in anything. And another god is Perkunas, which you have mentioned, which is atmospheric god, sort of connected to heaven, but he also controls the lighting. And even in my childhood, my grandmother would say that lighting is percunia, something which action of Perkunas. Yes, so it was she would see lightning and would say, "Oh, percunia," or hear the thunderstorm. Yes, so it's atmospheric god, which is in antagonism with Velinas or Valnes, which is the god of the underworld. Vele is name of soul of a deceased, departed person.
Right.
We have another word for soul of a living person, and if the person dies, his soul becomes Vele. And Valnes is Lord of Spirits of Veles.
So there's a certain similarity then between this tale and like the story of Persephone, who becomes married to Hades.
Exactly. And you don't see it if you read just on the surface level, yes? If you just read, weird story, serpents want to marry this girl and they are throwing out cows. So on the surface level, it's just an odd story. But if you go deeper, you realize that serpents are chthonic creatures which are interchangeable with Valnes and his servants. And when Christianity came, sort of long introduction to explain this, but when Christianity came, Christian missionaries needed words for Christian God, for devil, etc. So as they usually did, they listened to the names of and characteristics of pagan gods, and we heard that Dievas, sort of a heavenly father figure, he is not tainted by sins or something bad, not connected to anything evil in Lithuanian paganism. So we chose Dievas as the name of Christian God. And when we saw Velness, the Lord of the Underworld, who is connected with the dead, etc., they connected it with Hades and with devil. So that's how Christian name Velness came into being. And if we just interchange Žaltys with Velness, it can also mislead the reader, because they don't think about Christian devil when we are telling this, right?
Okay.
They're thinking sort of about like Hades, sort of. It's more complex than simply evil being. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to kind of like, you also get, I mean, it's clear that the serpents are spiritual beings on some level, although not only that, but they're kind of connected with the spiritual world. And so, I mean, I think one of the big sort of symbolic things going on in this is a human person being married to this spiritual being who is both a serpent, but also presents as a man, you know, but not human exactly. I don't know. It's interesting. So you could also read this as sort of the human soul's spiritual journey on some level, you know. But then there's all kinds of weird other stuff there, like being married to a spiritual being, you know. Yeah. Are these children Nephilim? We won't go there. But anyway, just want to throw that one out there, just for all the kids in the audience who like a certain other podcast.
Yes.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. It's interesting. I mean, I've loved this story ever since I read it the first time, but I don't know. I have to admit, I haven't maybe thought too deeply about some parts of it. So this is great. This is a good conversation.
And through these parallels, you can see why, as I said, Gintaras Beresnevičius calls it theophany. Yes, you said maybe the kids are Nephilim. Yes, because when you start opening the symbols, you see that it's much deeper than on the surface level.
Yeah.
Yes, another thing I wanted to point out immediately, you also talked about it in the last episode about Lithuanian stories. It's cuckoo, yes?
Yeah,
the name in
cuckoo
English
bird.
is the same like the sound, yes? Onomatopoeia, yes?
Yeah, we call it, onomatopoeia, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't do a good cuckoo bird sound, but my grandmother used to have what's called a cuckoo clock, which I think was from Germany, and not the one she had, but I think ultimately cuckoo clocks are from Germany. And that when, you know, the clock chimes or whatever, a little cuckoo bird comes out of the front of the clock and then goes back, and then a door closes. And my cousins loved this clock so much, and so much associated with our grandmother, that they referred to her as Grandma Cuckoo. That's how they called her. But it would make this, you know, cuckoo sound, you know, when the hour struck, you know. But yeah, so I mean, I know that cuckoos have this kind of, yeah, they're very charged with meaning in these stories.
Yes, it's basically an animal connected to the fate, to some myths connected to Laima, goddess of fate, some others connected to, you can guess it, Velness, to the same pagan god with which the snakes are connected, yes, the same. And you will see this again and again if you will look at the animals mentioned in this story. It always brings us back to Velness. So Yagute or cuckoo is also connected to Velness, and in culture it is connected to fate. So, for example, even when I was a kid, it was usual when we would hear cuckooing, kids would ask, how many years do we have to live? Yes, how many years we will live? And when you count the times, it cuckoos. And we had discussions about how to count it, because some say, one cuckoo is 1 decade. Another said, no, it's another system. And so we discussed and argued about how do you count it. But it was like popularly known thing that if you hear a cuckoo, you should you can ask how many years do I have to live. And if cuckoo is cuckooing at a house, it was usually said that someone will die in that house because cuckoo is cuckooing. So it's an animal connected to fate. And here we see that it seems that the fate of Eglė is to be married to Žilvinas. But people don't want it. They refuse it. And of course, if it's wellness, if it's sort of devilish figure, Hades of the underworld, we can understand why people don't want to give their daughter to this Hades. And they resort to village trickery. They choose different village animals, starting from small and going to more expensive and more expensive, ending with a whole cow. And they are trying to
in my head, I see the scene. I don't know if you've ever seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but there's one point where they do launch a cow, and that's what I see in my head is.
Well, one way to think about the different animals are basically as different placatory offerings. Right. So we're like, so what the serpent has asked for is one of our daughters, but maybe we can get off with a chicken, maybe we can get off with a pig, maybe we can get off with a cow, and so on, right? So you keep upping the ante. This is pretty common in stories like this. So this story itself is usually considered an ecotype. That is, it's a form of a story that's specific to a particular region, in this case, the Baltic. But there are other stories very similar to this. Some of you can probably think of things in mythology. Those German folklorists I mentioned actually came up with a typological system for recording fairy tales, folk tales, myths, and things, and trying to basically kind of schematically relate them. So this is called the Arne Thompson Uther Index. Which is fun to say because it's got Uther in it. So this story is very, which is usually called the snake as bridegroom. Is very closely connected to this story that's sometimes called the search for the lost husband, which is a variant, or sometimes also called the animal as bridegroom. The most famous example of this kind of type is the story of Cupid and Psyche, which is also the basis of the story of Beauty and the Beast. Right. So, typically speaking, what happens in all of these is something happens and the maiden becomes subject to this supernatural being. Now, an interesting version of this story that we talked about last time when we did Lithuanian fairy tales on the show was to talk about the story of the Swan Maiden, which is another very common type in folklore, especially anywhere across the northern hemisphere, all around the world. It's not always a swan, sometimes it's a crane or something like that. But and in that version of the story, it's the man who finds who captures and sort of marries a mythological woman, as opposed to what we have here. But in both cases, what it has in common is that there's something about her bathing clothes, right? The sort of the things that she took off when she was bathing. So like the way you get a swan wife is to wait for her to take off her swan feathers, and then you steal the swan skin, or you steal the stork coat, or sometimes the fox coat. You steal those things, and then basically as long as you don't ever let her get a hold of that again, she'll be a good, dutiful, faithful wife to you. But if she ever gets a hold of it again, then she's out of there. So this is kind of the inversion of that in a certain way, and it is very interesting because in most stories that cite that have a serpent husband, very often the serpent will be a winged serpent or even like a hydra like dragon, which is just a Greek variant of the same story. But he's always associated with water, usually has an underwater palace. And so there's this ancient, I would say, Indo-European association. Obviously it's not strictly Indo-European, because you find it in China and you find it in, ancient Mesopotamia and so on. But there's this ancient Indo-European association between the serpent and the waters, and the sort of like, representing chaos, but also potential and also fertility. And so if you tick him off too much, then all these bad things are going to happen. There's not going to be fertility. And so eventually you have to give him something, right? Yeah. And usually it's your daughter.
Your daughter. Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, why don't we move on to the next part of the story? So Deacon Seraphim, why don't you?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Father.
Yeah, I wanted to add, to finish one thing and add another. One thing is just to finish the thought. I wanted to point out that Cuckoo is basically stopping Eglė from not proceeding with her fate. That Cuckoo acts as yes, so she is enacting the fate. And another point I wanted to make is the linguistic connection. Žilvinas, Žaltys, I started speaking about it, so it's all Žeže. The name itself, Žilvinas, is connected with Žilvis, Želti. Žilvis is offspring, the small, when you have, for example, branch starts to grow, yes? Tree branch starts to grow. And also Želti is when greenery is growing, we say Želė. So it's all connected with life, with fruitfulness, and it's also what Žaltys is connected with. Again, Že, everywhere Že, and many things connected with greenery starts with Že. So even in his name, you can see very sort of we can see an allusion to what happens next, yes, with the kids becoming trees, because Žilvinas itself is etymologically connected with greenery, with growth.
Interesting. Sylvan.
And isn't there a goddess named Zemina?
Yes.
Is she part of this kind of cognate sort of terms here with life?
Because Žemė, also Žemė, is soil or earth.
Yeah. Okay.
And I will just say, by the way, since you mentioned the cuckoo again, in the Latvian version of the story, which is called The Grass Snake's Wife, she turns her sons into trees, but she turns herself into a cuckoo at the end of the story, which is also there. There's a variant of this one in Lithuanian that was, again, just part of the Germans who were around collecting these things. One of the versions that they collected, I think, is called the Schlange Weishaut. This would be like the snake called Whiteskin. And in that version of the story, which is a little more of a fairy tale, has a little more of a fairy tale quality to it than the myth that we're reading right now. She again turns herself into she turns her sons into or her children, 2 sons and a daughter, she turns them into oak, ash, elm, and then turns herself into the cuckoo again. So that seems to be like a very prominent variant of the story.
Yeah.
All right,
well, so Deacon Seraphim, I want to hear you pronounce all of these.
We'll see
Lithuanian
how that goes. It's been so long since I've been to Lithuania, I've probably forgotten everything. But
we have an expert in Lithuanian linguistics here.
Yeah. So 9 years passed, and Eglė bore her husband 4 children, 3 sons named Ažulas, meaning oak, Usis, meaning ash, and Berjas, meaning birch. How'd I do, Father?
Not bad.
Okay, all right. It's
not bad.
Good enough for government work. And also 1 daughter named Drvile. Sorry, is that a B or a V?
Drabula.
See? Anyway, Drabula. Eglė had all but forgotten her family until one day when she was playing with her oldest son, Ažulas. He asked her, "My dear mother, where do your parents live? I would like to go and visit them." In that moment, Eglė remembered her sorrows, her family, her homeland. She remembered her father, her mother, her brothers and sisters, and she began to wonder how things were going for them. Were they in good health? Had they prospered in the 9 years she had been gone from the world beneath the sun? Perhaps they had all died after so many years. She yearned to see her family and her homeland again, but her husband, the serpent Žilvinas, would not even listen to her entreaties. She asked him again and again, and finally he showed her a spindle of silk and told her, "Very well, but first you must spin this tuft of silk. Afterwards, I will let you go and visit your family and your homeland." Eglė sat down before the spindle. She spun all day, she spun all night. She spun and she spun, but the silk would not spin. "Spin, spin, spin," she said, "but it will never be spun." And she knew that she had been tricked. So she went to an old woman who lived beneath the sea, who was known to be a witch and a sorceress. Eglė asked her, "Grandmother, dear heart, please teach me how to spin this tuft of silk. I spin and I spin and I spin, and yet it will never be spun." And the old woman told her how to accomplish this task. "Cast the silk into a new kindled fire, otherwise you'll never be able to spin it." Eglė returned home and cast the silk into the flames of an oven which had recently been kindled. The silk went up in flames, and when the flames died down, where there had once been a bundle of silk, there was now a toad. But when Eglė picked up the toad, she found it was making silk from its body. Having spun and woven the silk, she returned to her husband and said, "Now, husband, please let me go and visit my parents and my homeland." Then Žilvinas, the serpent, drew out a pair of hard metal boots from beneath one of the drinking benches of his palace and said, "Very well, but first wear these boots down. Afterwards, I will let you go and visit your family and your homeland." Eglė put the boots on her feet. She stomped around the palace and even dragged her feet along the stone floor, but the boots were thick and were not all worn down. "Stomp, stomp, stomp," she said, "but they will never be worn down. Walk or do not walk, but these boots will last forever." So she went back to the old woman who lived beneath the sea, who was known to be a witch and a sorceress. Eglė asked her, "Grandmother, dear heart, please teach me how to wear down these boots of iron. I stomp, and yet they will never be worn down." And the old woman told her how to accomplish this task. "Go to a blacksmith and wear them down in his furnace," she said. "Otherwise, you will never be able to wear them out." Eglė did as she was told. She took them to a blacksmith and wore them down in his furnace. After 3 days of stomping, the boots were worn down. Then she returned to her husband and said, "Now, husband, please let me go and visit my parents and my homeland." The serpent said to her, "Very well, but you must bake at least a rabbit pie for the journey. Otherwise, what will you give to your brothers and their children?" But the serpent had ordered that all of the cooking utensils in the palace be hidden so that Eglė could not cook. Eglė thus found that she would have to bring in water without a bucket and make the dough without a bowl. Once again, she returned to the old woman who lived beneath the sea. "Grandmother, dear heart, please tell me, how will I bring in water without a bucket, and how will I mix the dough without a bowl?" And the old woman told her how to accomplish this task. "Spread out the sifted leavening, immerse the sieve in water, and with it mix the dough." Eglė did as she was told. All day long she mixed and baked until the pies were ready. Having completed all of the stipulations, she bid farewell to her husband and took her children to visit her homeland.
This is interesting in that, it's definitely a shift to a new stage of the story where she's basically a wife and mother, and her husband, she's living alone with her husband, and she wants to go see her parents, but he doesn't want her to leave. And so he gives her these impossible tasks, which she essentially kind of cheats to succeed at, sort of. I mean, there's a parallel to the previous, part of the story where, you going to the old woman who's living at the edge of the forest, the witch, the sorceress, whoever, the old wise woman, and finding some way to get past the problem, that the serpents are giving you. Why does he not want her to leave? What does that mean? Does that mean the end of their life together? Is that what's going on here?
I think that he wants to protect her because he understands that there is transcendent distance, incompatibility between two worlds, the worlds of people and the worlds of wellness, the underworld. The same like in the myth of Persephone and Demeter, Hades. When Hades abducts her and goes to the underworld, she cannot return anymore. And in this case, he also understands that her return would pose a danger to the family, that the family will suffer. So he wants her to stay. He puts these challenges. And for me, it's very interesting that there is a parallelism to old women, liminal women who live on the edge. And in one case, it's not the fate for her to be helped. So Cuckoo stops it and doesn't allow the help to be provided. And here, on the contrary, her fate is tragic. Her fate is to go back. So no Cuckoo is stopping her. She receives help, and she can return. I think that it's maybe superficial, but there is some parallelism in what's happening with the wife of Lotus from the Old Testament. She cannot look back, or everything will be lost, and she becomes sold to us. And here the same, Žilvinas says to Eglė that she cannot go back. She cannot look back. If she entered this underworld, if she entered the relation with spirits, she has to remain here. If she goes back, everything will be lost.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Anything you wanted to add to that, Deacon?
Yeah, I would just say that it's sometimes easier to understand the symbolism in stories like this if you think of it in kind of, just take the mythological elements out for a moment, and you just think about it in terms of human relations. So the two great kinds of marriage that fairy tales are always worried about or concerned with or always about are we could call like endogamy and exogamy. So endogamy would be marrying somebody very close to you, like within the tribe, or as we've seen in some examples in famous myths, within the family. And then exogamy is marrying somebody that's from the outside. So there are dangers both ways. Obviously, if you marry somebody who's too close to you, think about somebody like Oedipus, for instance, or the story we'll be telling you next time.
That's right.
If you marry somebody too close to you, that has a certain kind of consequence. If you marry somebody too far away from you, it can also have a kind of consequence, because one of the things that is the purpose of marriage, you could say, is the coming together or the reconciliation of two worlds. But if those worlds are ultimately irreconcilable, again, you're just thinking about for a moment about the Persephone myth, right? Well, Persephone, who, has something to do with spring, right? Life, all these different things. Well, she's the personification of that. And then on the opposite side, you have the personification of death, who becomes enraptured by and ends up capturing the personification of new life, right? And so they work out as sort of a compromise, and that's why you have winter and spring and different seasons and all these things, right? That's all kind of in there. But here you have something similar. You have two worlds that are totally they're just totally inimical to each other. In this kind of story, like the animal as bridegroom, or sometimes the monster as bridegroom stories, it's called, usually what happens, and this is, by the way, how you know this is not story's not going to have a happy ending, because the usual pattern would be, and I once heard Father Deacon Nicholas Kotar do a wonderful retelling of the Russian version of the story. But there's the Russian version of the animal as, or the monster as bridegroom, in which the maiden does basically has, she has a secret husband, or she has a secret lover, and like in Cupid and Psyche, he comes to her at night, and she has like a token that he's genuine, but also there's a taboo. Either she can't turn on the light, or she has his skin, or she has his feather, or something like this. She has something that belongs to him, which she then violates. She accidentally burns his animal skin, or she reveals his existence, or she turns on the light, all these different things. And then he's driven far away from her. And now, in order to get him back, she has to accomplish several tasks. So this is what happens in the Cupid and Psyche myth. She's given these impossible tasks by Venus, which she has to go and accomplish. But also, in the sort of the traditional Slavic version of this story, one of the main tasks that she's given is that she has a number of metal shoes that she has to wear down. And she wears these.
I want to add this in, by the way, because this is really interesting. In the chat, J.K. Ballings said, is there significance in the fact that all three challenges have to do with fire?
Yes.
Yes.
Good call, J.K. Ballings.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, is this the chthonic thing again? Is that what's going on?
Like, kind of go through all these things.
Yeah.
And then part of that is you usually get help from three old women. You know, like, you know, you can think of the Norns, you can think of the Fates, you can think of the, you know, but also sometimes they're just like the sun, the moon, and the wind, right? That's
double toil and trouble, perhaps.
Yeah. A little bit of shades of all those things. You get help from three old women, and they give you different ways to wear these things down, right? And certainly the fact that, you know, there's fire involved in you know, the resolution of these things. The first is the fire of the fire of your kitchen, right? The second is the blacksmith's fire, and then the third solution is doesn't involve fire, or at least, you know, maybe in the baking, but it more has to do with the question of mixture, and the question of, you know, it's related to like the story in the story of Cupid and Psyche, the story of her like separating the seeds, counting out the seeds.
Yeah, well, and there's always, I mean, this is the thing that struck me, right, is that in order for, especially the exogamy, you know, marriage of things that are very different, to work, but I mean, let's just say, right, we're Christian clergy, we're Orthodox Christian clergy, in order for marriage to work, because no matter how well matched we are with our husbands and wives, there's always difference, and there's always going to be, you know, conflict and tension and difficulty, no matter what. That the only way to make it work is through some kind of transformation, right? And from, you know, within a Christian context, marriage works when both people are repenting and being transformed in Christ, right? And I mean, then we can interpret this, right? The elements of fire and the wearing down, or the sifting, you know, the sieve, all this kind of stuff, as that the human person has to change in order for this to be reconciled, for it to be resolved. But it seems, you know, like there's this question of fate going on here, which tends to be a more kind of pagan emphasis, you know. These are just thoughts that are kind of going around in my head here. Yeah, go ahead, Father.
Well, anyway, just the general point I would like to make is that when this story has a happy ending, and it usually has a happy ending, these are the things that she is willing to do to get to her husband. But in this story, these are the things that she was willing to do to get away. And this is a good indication that the story is going to have a different kind of ending. So, Father Gintaras, I don't know if you want to say something specifically about the tests or anything.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say about the fire, because as you mentioned in the previous episode about Lithuanian stories, tales, Lithuanians in the story of Saints Anthony, John, and Eustathius, they are called fire worshippers, yes, and they were perceived as fire worshippers. And in the story of Sovius, they cremate their dead, yes, and fire is connected to the transition to the underworld. So this is underworld, and in order to transition to that place, you burn bodies. Yes, and another thing is that in some theological myths of Lithuania, Velnei, the underworld creatures, these snakes, they are the ones who teach people about fire. That's a secret they bring from the underworld to people, and people learn how to make fire from Velnei, from this Christians would call demons or just underworld creatures. So fire is connected to Žilvinas, to this Velnes who married her, and she learns about secrets about fire from this old woman and uses it. And also the creatures which appear there, for example, toad, they also usually connect creatures connected to Velnes. There is a myth about the creation of a world in which it said that when Dievas, God, started creating the world, Velnes wanted to mimic him and create his own creatures. But everything created by God was good, and everything created by Velnes was flawed. So, for example, reptiles, mosquitoes, everything comes from Velnes. And here you see Toad, one of the creatures connected with Velnes, with his bad creation skills. And I wanted to ask you, I noticed in the story that there is a phrase rabbit pie. Do you understand what is rabbit pie? Is it a
Rabbit
thing
pie?
Yes.
I mean, I would just see it as a meat pie with a rabbit in it.
No.
No.
That's why I asked. I wondered if there is. Do you have this idea? Because rabbit pie is simply a name of a pie which you bring as a gift from a journey. Even different.
I would like to immediately begin this practice in our culture today. Audience,
Bring as a gift for what?
As a gift
after a journey.
Oh, a journey. A journey.
It's like, yeah, it's like showing up. It's like showing up to a party with a bottle of wine. You know, like it'd be rude not
exactly,
to. Yes,
exactly.
yeah. I did not know this. The fact that there's like a meat pie involved,
and people go to journey and bring them to children. So,
although I'm imagining eating rabbit kibbenai now, that's.
Listen, I've eaten.
We could make this happen.
I have a lot of meat rabbits just behind the studio here, so I'd be more than happy to experiment on the rabbit pie situation. So that's wonderful. I had no idea. We would in English we would boringly call that like a hostess gift.
Yeah. This is one of the things that my wife always insists. Like, we have to bring something. I'm like, why? Yes. They invited us. No, we have to bring something.
Yeah. No, she's right. She's right. Yeah. It's very rude to show up to a party empty-handed.
It's especially for children. That's why it says your brothers and their children. And as I mentioned, not only rabbits, but also lomes bake these pies. So Lome is another pagan religious figure. Lome is a sort of dark female figure connected to Velnes. So Velnes in Christian language was devil, and Lome sort of maybe we could link it to succubus, something like that. But usually what Lome does, Lome is someone who lost, who is searching for a lost husband or lost bridegroom. She doesn't have a consort, but there is a sense that she lost it and she wants to have a consort. She also, in some versions, she has children. In other versions, she has only clay children or straw children, which when she can grab a baby from a person, from a human, and put a fake baby to crib instead of it.
Sort of a Lilith kind of figure.
Lilith kind of figure. And there was a custom to leave saunas at night prepared for lomes, for them to come and bathe in saunas. And usually they would leave gifts in the morning for people who left saunas for them. So as I mentioned, lost husband and lost bridegroom, and this longing for bridegroom, you can immediately see parallel with Eglė. And one of the interpretations is that Eglė is Lome, and she makes a rabbit pie because she is Lome, and that's what Lome does. And
interesting.
Velnes is her consort in that interpretation.
Fascinating. All right. I'm going to read the final part. We can discuss it, and then we can get into some deeply weird stories that I know Father has brought for us to discuss today. Okay. The serpent went along part of the way with them, getting them across the sea. Then he said to her, "Now, my wife, you should be no longer than 9 days in visiting your family and your homeland, and at the end of those 9 days you must return here to the edge of the sea. When you return, you must come alone, just yourself and the children. When you approach the sea, call for me like this: Gilvanas, dear Gilvanalis. If alive, may the sea foam milk. If dead, may the sea foam blood. If you see foaming milk coming toward you across the waves, then know that I am alive. But if you see blood, then you will know that I have reached my end. While you are at your parents' home, neither you nor the children should let this secret be known. Don't tell anyone how to call for me." Having said all of these things, the serpent bid farewell to his family and wished them a swift and safe return. For her own part, Eglė felt great joy in returning to her homeland. All of her relatives, in-laws, and neighbors gathered around to ask question after question. Everyone wanted to know what it was like living with the serpent and what her life was like beneath the sea. She described every aspect of her life, and everyone offered her wonderful hospitality, good food, and good talk. Eglė hardly even noticed the 9 days passing. During all this time, Agla's parents, brothers, and sisters had been scheming about how to keep Eglė from returning to her husband. They decided to question the children to find out how, when their mother returned to the beach, she was supposed to call for her husband. Once they knew this, the family could go down to the seashore, call for the serpent, and kill him. First, they called upon Ajvulas, trying to flatter him by telling him how clever and handsome he was. They questioned him all day, but he said that he did not know. Having failed, they threatened the child not to tell his mother of their actions. The second day, they tried the same thing with Wosis, and then with Berges, but they would not divulge the secret. Finally, they took Agla's youngest child and only daughter, Drabula, outside. At first she did as her brothers had done, claiming not to know. But they threatened to beat her with a rod, and being young and frightened, she told all. Then all 12 brothers took scythes and went down to the edge of the sea. Standing upon the shore, they called out, "Gilvanas, dear Gilvanalis, if alive, may the sea foam milk. If dead, may the sea foam blood." Then the sea began to foam white with milk, and the serpent came to the shore. But as he was swimming up, the brothers stood around him and hacked him to pieces with their scythes. Then they went home, but did not tell Eglė what they had done. After the 9 days of Agla's stay were ended, she bade farewell to her father and mother and brothers and sisters, and to all her family and friends, and went down to the seashore. She called for her husband as he had taught her. "Gilvanas, dear Gilvanalis, if alive, may the sea foam milk. If dead, may the sea foam blood." The sea shook, and the thunder rolled, and a great wave of foaming blood washed towards Eglė. Eglė heard the voice of her beloved husband crying out to her amid the storm, "Your 12 brothers with their scythes cut me down, for the secret of calling out to me was given to them by our own Drabula, our most beloved daughter." Then Eglė turned to her children, storming with wrath. To Drabula she said, "May you become a quaking aspen. May you shiver day and night. May the rain cleanse your mouth. May the wind comb your hair." But to her sons she said, "Stand strong, my sons, as strong as trees. I, your mother, will become a spruce." Then all became as Eglė had said. She became the spruce. Her sons became the oak, the ash, and the birch, the strongest of our trees. Her daughter became the quaking aspen, which trembles even in the slightest breeze, for she shook before her uncles and gave away her true father. The end. That's the end of the story, everybody. It's kind of dark here at the end. Kind of dark.
Told you,
but there's
not the one with the happy ending.
Yes, but there's this. To me, I don't know. I mean, I encountered this first in this version, and so, like, to me, if there were a happy ending, I don't know if it would work for me as well. There's something about the sad ending, the difficult ending that works. And of course, she says, "I'll become the spruce. You'll become the." But she's literally just naming them, their names. Yeah. When she says, "I'll become the spruce," she's saying, "I'll become Eglė." Right, and Wosis, Berges, and so on and so forth, Yeah. So I'm sure it comes off different in Lithuanian because the words are the same.
Yes, as I said, like in Greek mythology, it's an untranslatable wordplay when you have the same names and same things which are named the same name. And of course, oak, birch are noble trees connected with sacred forests, places where gods live, and of course, very firm trees. And on the contrary, aspen is a shaking tree, which is cursed to be that tree. Yes.
By the way, in the Russian version of this story, which is about Osip Tsarevich, the lake beetle, as opposed to a serpent, he's a lake beetle. She is turned into a cuckoo. She turns herself into a cuckoo, and she turns her children into various birds at the end.
Yeah. One of the good question from the chat we just got from Pierce Richardson. He says, how deep is the Beauty and the Beast trope, specifically the beastly husband giving permission to return home to his own demise? Any insights into this pattern? The sense that if he lets her go, it's all over, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's the big question with any story about exogamy is what's going to happen if you what's going to happen if you let her loose? And sometimes in the flipped version of the story where she's the sort of the fey creature and then you're just like a king or a woodcutter or something normal, right? It's always sort of like you have the chest that she's not allowed to open, and in that chest are her swan wings, and if she finds them again, she will leave you, right? That's even there in the Volan, the Wayland myth. And then the flip side of that is like when he's the fey creature, when he's the phoenix, or when he's the firebird in the Russian story, or when he's the king of the serpents, the great amber palace at the bottom of the sea, like all these different things, then it's actually you're trying to keep her in the enchanted world, right? You're trying to keep her in the land of enchantment. You're trying to keep her in the palace. You're trying to give her everything, but then there's always this, what if she just goes back home to her parents? So those are the kind of the two, they're flip sides of the same kind of thing. But ultimately, one of the takeaways from these kinds of stories is very simply that you cannot keep the swan wings in the chest forever, that you can't keep her locked up in your palace forever. Sooner or later, if this thing is going to work, you're going to have to trust her. And then, of course, sometimes that ends happily and sometimes that does not.
Yeah. Well, and like an interesting question that one of you put in the notes is, that the murder of Gilvanus is done with scythes, like not with swords or knives or anything like that, but scythes, which are agricultural. And so, as you told us earlier, Father, right, the serpents are connected with agriculture, with life, with growth, with all of this kind of stuff. And so it represents, I would say, a dark version, like it's humans harvesting, right, but cutting off the source of life. Like this is
but also like taming nature so that you can have the source of life without nature's but on your terms, not on nature's. I mean, that's what irrigation is, right?
Yeah. Like if I were an environmentalist living in modern Lithuania, I would bring up this image to say, look at how factory farming is doing. Like you're killing Gilvanus all over again. Except I don't know if you want to get into farm politics.
Be a bad example because it works in this story. Right? Sort of.
I put that note because I think it's also a beautiful parallelism, because in the beginning of a story, they try to use sort of village trickery to stop wildness or snake or serpent, and it doesn't work because it's not the fate. And in the end of the story, they use again their village items, and they manage to stop him. And also it sort of tames the power of the underworld, because in the beginning of the story he says, I will induce famine, there will be no rain, and you suffer, etc., etc. And in the end they tame this power, and they kill Žilvinus.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to add about of course, obviously, all these trees named here are connected again with wilderness. And regarding spruce, there is also a beautiful connection between snake and spruce, because snakes change skin, and that way they were viewed as sort of immortal, sort of again and again renewing as creatures and continuing to live. And the spruce is always green in winter and in summer, and also symbolizes some eternity, life which doesn't stop. And spruce branches were used and are still used in many on many occasions. So, for example, if there is a large feast in a village church, spruce branches can be used to decorate the entrance to the church, and they were used during funerals. They would lay on the floor spruce, and it again connects going of Eglė, of the soul, to the underworld, to wellness, and spruce as a symbol of this going away of the funeral. So the spruce itself is also very connected to Žilvinus. And I think for me, one of the things I saw in the story was that we see how pagan world is fragmented. You see contradiction between two realms, between the human realm and underworld. You see how they cannot be reconciled. But on the other hand, when you read the story of salvation of humanity by Christ, you see the reconciliation of everything. And Saint Maximus the Confessor speaks about different opposites which are reconciled in Christ. So Christ even defeats Hades and even liberates people from Hades to be reconciled with him, and everything becomes one in Christ. But here in this story, you can see an opposite worldview, a totally different worldview, where the world is fragmented, and you cannot reconcile different parts of it.
Yeah, fascinating. I've this, I don't know, this has been one of my favorite conversations we've ever had on this show, Deacon Seraph. I mean, this has been absolutely just amazing to me. I think part of it is because, you know, since I first came across this story a few years ago, I've really just loved it. But this is probably the deepest dive that we've taken into something like this. So I'm so happy to have this conversation. So any final comments that either we want to give on Eglė before we move into some of the syncretic stories that we're going to talk about here briefly?
No, I would like to discuss about 30 other similar stories and see if we can understand the patterns better. But we'll just save that for next time I'm writing the script. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Well, actually, there's one thing I wanted to ask about. Like, is this on some level like an origin story of some of the most common trees in Lithuania? Like, do people, when they encounter these trees, is it likely that they may think about this story on some? I mean, oaks obviously are huge. I mean, oaks are such a massively central image. And even, you know, you mentioned the three martyrs of Vilnius. You know, they're hung upon an oak, and then an oak becomes the altar of the tree that's built. I mean, there's this deep oakiness, as it were, going on. I mean, so how, I don't know. I mean, trees are always kind of mythic on some level, I think, for everybody. But do people think of this story, or is it just sort of a general kind of mythical character of trees?
Yes, of course. One of the layers of the story is that it's a theological story about how these kinds of trees come into being. And this is the obvious layer when you read it in Lithuanian, because ąžuolas becomes ąžuolas, beržas becomes beržas, and it's an obvious layer. So that's why I sort of skipped it because by default it's the simplest layer to understand. That this is origin of oak, this is origin of birch. But when you dissect the symbols, you see the deeper layers of the story.
Yeah.
But of course, this is one of the layers of the story, the origin of trees. And speaking about oaks, I would also like to add that even in contemporary culture, every Lithuanian knows where the oldest oak in Lithuania is. Stelmužės ąžuolas. Everyone knows the oldest oak in Lithuania.
Interesting. I mean, I just want to point out also, if people didn't think about this, is that so then the origin of these trees is depicted as being from the marriage of a human woman with this underworld, otherworldly being. Like that's where these trees come from, has this kind of, hybrid mythic origin. So
if you like that, Father Andrew, I should read some Ovid to you sometime.
In Latin, I assume.
You'll get to learn way more about the origins of various trees than you wanted to know.
Yeah. And by the way, in Greek mythology, in Eastern mythology, you can see a lot of gods connected to trees, like Dionysus, Adonis. They're also connected to trees. There is a parallelism in that too.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, moving on, we've got two stories that we're going to discuss now. So, Father, why don't you just kind of introduce the idea of this kind of story to us? Because I think for most Americans, this is going to be deeply weird. Like, we don't have stories like this.
Yes. So basically, as I said, Lithuania was, at least likes to call itself one of the last European pagan nation. One of the last nations to be Christianized. Actually, historians say that the reason behind that is because Catholic and Orthodox missionaries were fighting for the souls of Lithuanians, and the Lithuanians saw choice between Catholicism and Orthodoxy as a geopolitical choice between two worlds, the world of Western Europe and the world of Byzantium. So that's why they hesitated to join one or the other world. But in the end of the 14th century, when Lithuania was baptized, Christianized, many sacred oaks were cut, forests were cut, many idols were destroyed, and people were hastily baptized. And it was done hastily because why did Lithuania embrace Roman Catholicism? Because one of the Lithuanian dukes, Jogaila, he was Grand Duke actually, he was proposed to become King of Poland, to marry Jadwiga, princess, and to become King of Poland. But in order to become King of Poland, he had to Christianize his homeland, Lithuania. So he agreed to that, accepted that, and he started quickly converting everyone to Christianity. What did it mean in practice? It means that everyone had to be baptized. Catechism is like today. It was secondary. Jogaila needs to become King of Poland, so everyone has to be baptized. The means are not important. So, for example, some people would come to be baptized 2 or more times, because when you are baptized, you get white robes. So people would come, get white robes, get baptized, go back to home, change clothes, and come back again to get another set of white robes.
Get excited, internet.
Yeah, I think about Vytautas. This actually puts it into more context. When I think about Vytautas, who was baptized 3 times, baptized Catholic, baptized Orthodox, baptized Catholic again. Probably not for a white robe, but the idea of doing it over and over again. I mean, it's still very, the country is not really Christian yet,
Yes. And one of the most important moments in history of Lithuania was Battle of Žalgiris, or Grunwald in German, on Tannenberg. And it was a battle between Christianized Grand Duchy of Lithuania and Poland, of course, Kingdom of Poland. against the Teutonic order, so Christian knights. And if you think about it, it happened in 1410 after Christianization of Lithuania. And you think about it, it's very odd. Why Catholic knights, Catholic basically crusaders, are fighting Catholic Lithuania and Catholic Poland? And their side of story was that they said, "Oh, we are not really Catholic. We just baptized because of political reasons, and we are not really Catholic." But on the other hand, Poles and Lithuanians said, "No, we accepted Catholicism, and we should stop attacking us." And in that battle, they killed the grand master of order, and that's how they stopped the order from invading Lithuania. And later they baptized Western Lithuania, which was under the Teutonic order, Žemaitija, in 1430, even later than main Lithuania, 15th century. And that was also an argument for the Pope that these Teutonic knights are lying, because they had under their rule Žemaitija, Western Lithuania, and they didn't Christianize it at all. Only in 1430, Lithuania Christianized this part of it. And so this all very late dates, 14th, 15th century, when the country becomes Christianized. And of course, what it means for Lithuania in the 16th century, that when Protestant Reformation begins, Protestants say, you see, these Catholics are not really Christians. We need to have a mission among them and to bring them to Christ. And we have a meeting here of Orthodox Christian missionaries, again, Protestant missionaries, and Catholics reacting to that start Counter-Reformation. And some scholars say that real Christianization of Lithuania is done in the 16th century, when Jesuits, Protestants, Orthodox are really bringing people to Christ. And they are, after 200 years, they are really becoming Christians. And on the practice level in village, this meant that for a long time people mixed pagan stuff with Christian stuff, and they basically lived between two worlds. They were baptized, they went to the church, they heard the gospel was read in Latin, so they didn't understand maybe much, but through sermons they knew general ideas of Christianity. They knew what is the message of the gospel. They knew the characters, and also they had this past pagan oral tradition. So this resulted in sort of syncretism, and when you fathers were in Lithuania, I told you some stories that show this kind of syncretism demonstrated. So now we will share it with the listeners.
All right. Okay. So we've got two stories, and Father actually asked that we read these. So the first one is very, very short. So I'll take this one, and then Deacon Seraphim, you can take the second one. So, okay. So little introduction here at the beginning. So one of the examples of Lithuanian Christian folk imagination concerns the star cluster that is known in English as the Pleiades. So in Lithuanian, it is known as Sietinas. Did I get that right? Sietinas. All right. Which means a sieve. So it's the kind of tool that's used to sift flour, right? So Lithuanian folklore explains the stars with a wonderfully strange little story. So here's how it goes. Once the Holy Virgin Mary was sifting flour, but her sieve disappeared. She discovered the demons had stolen it, so she sent St. Mark to bring it back. The demons, of course, did not want to return it peacefully, and St. Mark had to fight them for it. In the struggle, the sieve was bent and damaged, and the Virgin Mary could no longer use it for baking, so the sieve was...
And I think there are two ways to look at this. One way is say, those pagan Lithuanians, they don't understand the gospel. They're creating their own stories about Virgin Mary, etc., etc. But on the other hand, it's sort of secularization or desacralization of the sky. because in pagan Lithuania, stars are connected to spirits, to gods, etc. For example, morning star, Aušrinė, is goddess, Vakarinė, evening star, is goddess. Of course, sun and moon are gods, and one of the interesting things is that sun is female goddess and the moon is male god, which in many cultures is the other way around. And a morning star and evening star serves to the sun and prepares her bed and lights her fire. So the sky is full of gods and spirits. But here in this story, we see in the Christian culture, now the stars are not gods, not spirits. It's just a sieve owned by Virgin Mary, which was unfortunately damaged and thrown into the sky. And now it's no use of worshipping or even venerating stars. It's just a thing.
That's interesting. Yeah. Fun. All right. Deacon Seraphim, why don't you read this next one here?
This story begins in heaven. When God cast down the rebellious angels, they became demons. St. Michael drove them through the gates of heaven and into hell, but one of them hid behind the heavenly doors. Whenever St. Michael counted the fallen spirits, one was missing. They searched everywhere, they searched high, they searched low, but no one thought to look behind the door. At last, the hidden demon grew curious, because, as the story says, a demon is always curious. He peeked out. They caught him, dragged him before God, and God ordered St. Michael to chain him to the bottom of hell. This demon became known as Beelzebub, the ruler of the other demons. But Beelzebub was a cruel master. Whenever one of the lesser demons failed in his duties, Beelzebub punished him. One day he became angry with a small, lame demon and threw him out of hell, ordering him to go to earth. There he had to serve a poor, God-fearing man for 1 year, tempt him into sin, and bring his soul back to hell. So the little demon turns himself into a farmhand and comes to the poor man's house and says, "Master, do you need a servant?" And the poor man answered, "What would I do with a servant? I am poor myself. Sometimes I do not even have enough bread for my own table." But the demon begged him, "I ask for no wages. Let me stay and you will see. Your household will prosper. At the end of the year, you will only have to serve me for a couple of hours." The man agreed. And indeed, the demon worked wonders. He brought flour, he brought wood, seed, animals, crops, and money. The poor man became rich. But here was the demon's problem. The man became rich, but he did not become wicked. He thanked God, he helped the poor, he did not curse, steal, or turn away from God. The demon had made him wealthy, but he had not gained his soul. So at the very end of the year, the desperate demon tries one last trick. He leads the man to a church, lifts the foundation of the church, and tells him to crawl underneath and take a vessel of holy water and the sprinkler. Then the demon brought him down to hell. "When we enter," he whispers, "dip the sprinkler into the holy water and sprinkle everything." Well, the man did as he was told. He entered hell and began sprinkling holy water everywhere. The demon screamed and fled, and even Beelzebub, chained at the bottom of hell, was struck with the holy water, broke loose, and ran away. St. Michael heard the terrible noise and came down to see what had happened. Hell was empty. Beelzebub had escaped. Only the little lame demon was standing there. So St. Michael chained him in the Beelzebub's place. From that time, the tale says, demons stopped wandering around the earth so much because they knew how dangerous human beings could be, especially when they came carrying holy water.
I mean, as a priest, I love this story. That's great. That's great. I did read it before this, so this is my first time hearing this story. Yeah, it's funny because like it's completely, it presents itself as an entirely Christian story. Like there's no gods or anything like that from mythology in here, and yet this is very much like you could just sort of replace the, like it reads like a pagan story in some ways,
Yes.
So it's narratively syncretic, even though the characters are not, not mixing characters together from different worlds, so to speak.
Exactly. If you change the names, you could get a pagan story out of it. But what's important, because sometimes neo-pagans, contemporary pagans, we say, oh, you see, this is pagan mythology. But if you look at it, not only the names are changed, but the message itself is very different. It's a totally Christian message. So the pagan culture, Lithuanian pagan culture, is transformed into actually Christian culture, and you see people knew basic characters and stories of the Bible. We connected it, and one of the interesting points in this story, why I like it, is that now devil is presented as a trickster. So basically, if Velness was a powerful god, now it just some funny demons, and one person with holy water can overpower them all with the power of Christ, of course. And what you see in Lithuanian Christian culture, you spoke about it in the other podcast, that for example, you spoke about the context of Halloween, yes, when the evil powers are laughed at. So it's a very common theme in Christian Lithuania, medieval Christian Lithuania, that evil powers are weaker than Christians, and they are sort of looked at ironically. In the 20th century, one author wrote a book called Baltaragio Malūnas. It's although it's written in the 20th century, it uses traditional themes, ethnology, etc. So in this book, the devil Pinchukas, he wants to marry a girl, and he does different things to get married, and they actually, if I remember correctly, they marry in a Christian church. And the thing is that, again, he's a trickster, and he's weaker than Christians, and he loses. So the powerful Velness is diminished to a small trickster, sort of like maybe Scandinavian Loki or something like that.
Well, and I mean, isn't this depiction of the demonic, isn't this what's represented in Orthodox iconography? Like when Orthodox icons depict demons, they're small, they're flimsy, they're flat, they're monochromatic. You know, saints are stomping on them, hammering them in the head, all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is very compatible. This is absolutely compatible with Orthodox tradition. The other thing that struck me about this is that there's almost a kind of a little bit of a harrowing of Hades, harrowing of hell image going on here as well. You know, of someone going down into the underworld and making all the demons run, with the power of Christ through holy water in this particular case. So, fascinating, fun.
Also, interesting moral point is that the person is given a lot of wealth, a lot of material things, but he doesn't succumb to the temptation. He doesn't get tempted, distracted. So it also it's a tale about how material things in itself, like the Church Father said, they are just a means, and everything depends on how you use them, what's your relation to them. So in this story, demon does everything to tempt the person, but he fails.
Yeah. All right. Fun. Interesting. Okay. We've mostly interacted with the chat as we've been going, but just here at the end, our producer, Simon, he's got a couple of comments that he wanted to throw out there in front of us. So he says, what's the connection between the Virgin Mary and the formation of stars/heavenly bodies? This is right up your alley, Deacon Seraphim, I think. This also happens in the Norwegian tale with the Virgin Mary as a godmother, where her goddaughter who lives in her house opens up locked rooms in the Virgin Mary's attic and releases the stars, the moon, and ultimately the sun. I've never heard that one before. So
Yeah, there's a few different versions.
What's going on?
By the way, the Virgin Mary shows up in several fairy tales in Grimm's. People don't know this because they haven't actually read Grimm's, but
It's not in the Disney version.
no, and even things like the fairy godmother in Cinderella is actually Cinderella's dead saintly mother. In the actual Grimm story, right? So there's a lot more sort of Christianity in Grimm's than people remember, but so I mean, I think it's fairly easy. The key to understanding this is just to remember that she is a woman clothed with the sun and having the moon under her feet. And traditionally, when we depict her, I have, in fact, people can get mad about this, I guess, but I have somewhere here in my studio, over there in the icon corner, or near the icon corner, I have an icon of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is a famous Roman Catholic image of the Virgin Mary that has a miraculous story about it.
I mean, Our Lady of the Gate of Dawn has those same. Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But the point is being, there's all images of the Virgin Mary are Orthodox by default. Sorry, I don't make the rules. But Archbishop Dimitri of blessed memory, who founded my diocese, he really loved this icon, and it's been blessed by multiple Orthodox bishops. So anyway, like I said, I literally don't make the rules, but I know the people who do. So. But in that icon, also in Our Lady of the Gate of Dawn, right? You have this sort of the celestial imagery. This is very related to a talk that I gave at the Lord of Spirits conference this last year, which has to do with the astrological imagery in the apocalypse, and that this sort of culminates in this image of a woman who now takes these things that are traditionally the things that rule over us, and they're just part of her ornamentation, right? And that's sort of, I would just say that is what you would expect in a folkloric representation. That makes kind of perfect sense to me. So.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, final comments on any of this, but especially on Eglė. Like, what is it about this story that makes it so kind of compelling and interesting? I mean, I'll answer for myself, and that is, when I encountered this story just a few years ago for the first time, there was something about discovering it that, like, I always loved fairy tales when I was younger, but I'd never heard this one before. I might have read ones that are similar. I don't remember. But there was something about it that felt like remembering something that I had forgotten. And it was like in some ways, like, I mean, I don't know. I'm gonna be a little sentimental for a moment. I'm sorry, but for me, it was very much like going to Lithuania, where I had never been, and feeling, oh, this belongs to me on some level. This place belongs to me, or I belong to it, even though I've never been here before. So there's something kind of deeply true about the story that I think just connects. At least for me, I'm sorry, I'm being a little scattered in when I'm talking about it, but that's the way that I feel about it. Yeah. Father, what are your comments about this story? Like, why is it such an important story?
For me personally, I think that the story is quintessentially Lithuanian, because when you read about these trees, spruce, even the scent of spruce itself, oak, reminds you of Lithuanian countryside. Of course, snakes, also very Lithuanian, and everything what's happening. And sea, of course, we have only one sea, Baltic Sea. So I think that's why so many Lithuanians are connected to it, because even on the surface level, it has everything dear to every Lithuanian. It reminds you of a home. And on the other level, I really like that when you start to dissect the symbols, it has very deep meaning. And one of the things I think we can learn from it, that you shouldn't connect your soul with spiritual beings, because that doesn't end well. Of course, there is one true spirit which you should connect with,
Indeed.
but not ruler spiritual beings.
Yeah, absolutely. Deacon Seraphim, you get the last word.
I love this story and other stories like this because, yes, as Father said, it is quintessentially Baltic, but also it's so similar and so different from other stories in other cultures. And I think, that the thing that I'm always interested in is looking for two things that are similar in lots of respects, and then trying to figure out why are they different in these respects. And there is, there's a version of the story that has a happy ending. Just to give one quick example, the story of the Firebird in Russian folklore and fairy tales, which, as I mentioned, Father Deacon Nicholas Kotar has told before. And in that story, it's a story about longing, and it's a story about she was just young and she was kind of foolish, and she let something really beautiful get away from her, and now she's willing to do anything she can to get it back. And I do think there's something really moving about that. Something about this seems, I'm not going to say older or more profound, but something about this version of the story is very different. It's just of a very different quality, even though many of the details and the patterns are the same. And in this case, it's a sort of, you can sort of see him saying, man, I know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. And this is why he even tells her, listen, watch for what you see on the water, and, but he lets her go anyway, because at the end of the day, I hate to say if you love something, you have to let it go, but that does seem to kind of be the gist of some of these traditional stories, which don't always have happy endings. But I do think all the best fairy tales or all the best myths, they do work on multiple levels, right? So they can be about the old religion, and they can be about cosmology and heaven and earth and masculine and feminine and all these different things. But they can also be about the experience of being forced to marry someone you didn't choose, which is sort of the sort of thing that happened a lot in the ancient world. Being forced to marry someone you didn't choose from a long way away. And no matter how well he treats you, no matter how beautiful his house is, it's not your mother's house. That woman who never quite sort of grows up and never quite grows into the person that she's meant to be. So I don't know. There's something tragic about it in that sense, which I find beautiful. So
yeah, thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion. Father Gintaras, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Thank God. And please come back. Let's do some more.
Yes, it was lovely to head back to the Baltic once more. Honestly, the fact that it's been like 20 episodes since we did another Lithuania installation is like amazing self-control on Father Andrew's part, honestly, more than anything. So if you like this content and other things like it, please give us some of those likes, some of those reviews, some of those clicks, but most importantly, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and click that little notification bell. The algorithm loves it when you do those things. All hail the algorithm. Okay, I don't know what you had me say that, Father Andrew.
I didn't.
And definitely, of course, share this show with your fellow lovers of tales.
And until next time, may fair winds take your voyage to the amber shores of the Baltic.
This has been a listener and viewer-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.